Thank you very much, Chair. I am stepping in on behalf of my colleague, Commissioner Girisha Topsisono, who is the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information, to address you on questions relating to the right to receive information and free expression, and on media diversity, safety of journalists, and freedom of expression and access to information on the internet. The Egyptian Constitution, in its Article 67 and 68, provides that information, data, statistics, and official documents belong to the people and obliges the state to disclose them and make them available from various sources to every citizen in a transparent manner, and guarantees freedom of the press, printing, and publication in print, visual, audio, and electronic media. It also grants Egyptians the right to own and publish newspapers and establish visual and audio media outlets and digital media. Nevertheless, the Commission expressed during the period under review concerns about restrictions on freedom of expression and access to information in Egypt, and hence the gap between what the Constitution provides and the practice. What is the legal and institutional framework of freedom of expression and access to information in Egypt that is in place, and how consistent is this institutional and legal framework with the very expansive protection that is envisaged in Articles 67 and 68 of the Egyptian Constitution, as it relates to Article 9 of the Charter. With respect to the right to receive information, is there any law on the right to access to information in Egypt? Is the government of Egypt aware of the African Commission's model law on the right to access information in Africa, which the Commission adopted in 2013 to help states parties to the African Charter to have authoritative source of reference in order for them to adopt access to information law? Can you also, in the light of Article 67 and 68, which also talks about the obligation of the state to disclose information, whether there is an authority in Egypt that actually implements this constitutional provision for making information available to Egyptians, and does it enjoy sufficient human and financial resources to fulfill its mandate? On the right to freedom of expression, the Special Rapporteur notes that CSOs allege that Anti-Cyber and Information Technology Crimes Law, number 180/2018, grants authorities broad discretion to censor content, and law number 175/2018 permits authorities to block websites without judicial orders. The delegation is invited to respond to these statements, whether these statements are true, that the discretions that law number 180/2018 provides to authorities is so wide that it is subject to arbitrariness and therefore getting into the way of the constitutional guarantees provided and those of Article 9 of the Charter, and whether law number 178/2018 actually permits authorities to block websites or other communication platforms without judicial orders. To which extent do these limitations observe the principle of justifiable limitations under Article 9 of the African Charter, including the African Commission's Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa. What is your position with respect to repealing criminal defamation laws, which may impede freedom of speech? And there is a resolution that this commission adopted, and indeed judicial judgment handed down by the African Court that makes criminal defamation inconsistent with freedom of expression. And therefore, we would appreciate your feedback on your position on repealing criminal defamation laws in Egypt. What are the concrete measures taken by the government of Egypt to ensure better respect for freedom of expression, including on the internet, particularly in the context of elections? The delegation is also invited to comment on allegations that self-censorship among media professionals is gaining ground due to judicial, political, and economic pressures. The special rapporteur also says that sources report that independent journalists and media outlets are subjected to exclusively onerous administrative and licensing requirements under Act number 180 of 2018. And the delegation is therefore invited to provide clarification in respect of the nature of administrative and licensing requirements and whether this actually impedes the kind of guarantees provided in the Constitution and that which is consistent with freedom of expression and access to information as well as media under Article 9 of the Charter. The delegation is also invited to elaborate on the composition of the Supreme Council for Media Regulation in Egypt. On media diversity, the delegation is invited to provide data on the media landscape in Egypt. What are the measures taken to guarantee equal access to public advertising revenue for all media, both public and private, in order to enhance equity in the media landscape? On the safety of journalists, the Commission expressed concern during the period under review with regards to the arrest and prolonged pretrial detention of journalists in Egypt, and the details are provided in the questions. Some sources allege that 19 journalists remain detained in Egypt as of today. The delegation is invited to provide updates, particularly on the case of Mohammed Hussein and Mohammed Al-Yamani. What concrete measures have been taken by the government of Egypt to ensure effective protection of journalists, particularly in terms of putting in place measures consistent with resolution of the African Commission, Resolution 468/2020, on the safety of journalists and media practitioners in Africa, which tries to articulate the kind of standards required to meet Article 19 standards? Are there any specific measures to protect journalists during electoral campaigns, elections, and post-electoral context? And with respect to the right to privacy, the report informs that a law on cybercrime was enacted in 2018, among which it aims to strike a balance between freedom of expression and the right to privacy, and to combat what it calls the unlawful use of electronic documents. That is in page 36. The delegation is invited to provide updates on the adoption of executive regulations for the Personal Data Protection Law. Are any spyware or surveillance technologies are being used currently in Egypt to monitor online communications? Is there in Egypt any independent regulatory body to protect data comprising representatives from various sectoral segments? in respect of freedom of expression and access to information on the Internet, in the light of the fact that Internet and social media shutdowns violate the right to freedom of expression and access to information and are contrary to Article 9 of the African Charter, does the state have measures to ensure that the Information and Communications Technologies Authority doesn't require Internet service providers to shut down the Internet in Egypt? What measures have the government of Egypt taken to ensure the use of AI doesn't violate human and people's rights? And finally, some last questions. Can the government provide clarification on the allegations that the cybercrime law and media regulation law is susceptible to being used to restrict freedom of expression online? Can the government respond to reports which indicate that the charge of spreading false news has been used to criminalize free speech online, particularly in view of Article 22 of the Declaration, which provides that states shall review all criminal restrictions of content to ensure that they are justifiable and compatible with international human rights law and standards? Can the government provide clarification on reports received which indicate that in January 2025, Hossam Bahagat, the executive director of the Egyptian Initiative for Personal Rights, was charged with financing a terrorist group and publishing false news following the release of a statement published by ACHPR on conditions of detention? Can the government provide clarification on reported restrictions on freedom of expression through prosecutions for online content in the name of morality? These are the questions from the Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression and access to information. Thank you for your kind attention. Over to you, Chair.